There are moments in life that split everything into before and after. One sentence, one look, one night that peels back the beautiful surface of a life you thought was real and shows you exactly what was underneath it the whole time. This is my before and after. My name is Diana, and for 12 years I was the wife of a very rich, very respected, very dangerous man, dangerous not with his hands, but with his words, with his silences, with the slow, patient way he made me believe that without him, I was nothing worth noticing. His name was Richard, and from the outside, we were everything people dream about. A sprawling home in the kind of neighborhood where the lawns are always perfect, and nobody ever raises their voice loud enough to be heard. 2 cars that cost more than most people's annual salary. A marriage that looked, in every photograph, like proof that love and success could live in the same house. What the photographs never showed was the way he spoke to me behind closed doors. Not with cruelty you could point to and name easily. It was quieter than that, more refined. The kind of disrespect that wears a tailored suit and speaks in a calm voice so that when you try to describe it to someone else, you sound dramatic, oversensitive, ungrateful. He would correct the way I ordered food at restaurants, speak over me mid-sentence at dinner parties, and never once apologize for it. Introduce me to his business associates with a smile that never quite reached his eyes, and a hand on my back that felt more like ownership than affection. And I accepted it. For 12 years I accepted it, because he was also generous when it suited him, and charming when there was an audience, and occasionally the man I had first fallen in love with would surface just long enough to make me believe the rest was something I had imagined. But there was one evening, a Tuesday, ordinary in every way, when he came home from a business dinner, poured himself a drink, looked at me across the kitchen, and said something that I will never forget for as long as I live. I had spent the afternoon arranging a surprise dinner for his mother's birthday. The table was set, the food was warm, every detail was perfect. He looked at it all, looked at me, and said, "Did I ask you to do this? This is exactly the kind of thing you do to make yourself feel useful." And then he walked upstairs. I stood in that kitchen completely still. And something inside me, something I had been pressing down for 12 years finally, quietly, stopped pressing. The morning after that dinner, I woke up before the sun and sat by the window for a long time. I wasn't crying. That surprised me. I had cried so many times over smaller things: a missed anniversary, a forgotten birthday, a comment made in front of friends that he always later called a joke. But that morning I felt something different, clearer, like a fever that had finally broken in the night. I started paying attention in a way I hadn't allowed myself to before. Richard ran a property development company that carried both our names on its original founding documents, a detail he had long since buried under restructuring and rebranding. When we married, I had come into the relationship with a significant inheritance from my grandmother. Richard had used a portion of that money in the early years of the business, during a period when investors were hesitant and cash flow was tight. He never spoke about that, not once. Not to me, not to anyone. I had signed documents over the years without reading them carefully enough. I trusted him the way you trust someone whose name is on the same mailbox as yours, the way you trust the person who shares your bed and your table and your last name. That trust, I was beginning to understand, had been the most expensive thing I ever gave away for free. I began quietly gathering things, old bank statements I still had access to, partnership records from the early years of the business, emails I had been copied on and never deleted. I wasn't sure what I was looking for at first. I just knew that a man who had spent 12 years making me feel small was not a man who had nothing to hide. What I found took my breath away. Richard had been slowly, methodically transferring company profits into a private account I was never meant to know about. He had begun the process 18 months earlier, around the same time he had started pushing me to sign a new financial agreement he called a routine update. I had signed it. I had signed it because he handed it to me between a phone call and a school run and told me it was nothing important. It was not nothing. I took everything I had found to a financial attorney, a woman I found entirely on my own, someone completely outside our social circle, someone Richard had never met and could not charm. She looked through the documents for a long time. Then she looked up at me and said, "Do you understand what this means?" I said I was beginning to. She said he has been preparing to exit this marriage for over a year, but he made several very significant legal errors along the way. I felt the floor shift beneath me, not with fear, with something that felt, for the first time in a very long time, like power. I drove home. I made dinner. I smiled across the table at my husband. And I said absolutely nothing. The legal process moved quietly and quickly, the way these things do when the evidence is clear and the preparation is thorough. My attorney filed the necessary claims before Richard's team even realized what was happening. The private account was flagged. The early partnership records with my grandmother's inheritance clearly documented as seed funding were submitted. The agreement I had signed 18 months earlier was reviewed and found to contain terms that, given the full financial picture now visible, his own lawyers struggled to defend. Richard hired the most expensive legal team in the city. They were very good, but they were working with a story that had too many holes in it, holes that his own quiet scheming had created. The settlement proceedings lasted 6 weeks. Richard spent most of them with the expression of a man who had carefully built a trap and somehow walked into it himself. I did not attend every session with anger. I attended with documentation. That, I learned, is the difference between emotion and power. Emotion makes noise. Power brings paperwork. When it was over, I walked away with my legal share of a company I had helped fund at its very foundation. I walked away with the family home which Richard had assumed he would keep. I walked away with financial security that was now entirely in my own name, managed by people I had chosen, protected by agreements I had read word by word before signing. Richard moved into an apartment in a part of the city where nobody knew his name. The business, without the capital the settlement required him to release, contracted significantly. Several key investors chose not to renew their agreements once the legal proceedings became known in professional circles. A man whose reputation was built on the appearance of stability and control cannot easily recover when both are publicly questioned. I heard he was rebuilding. I genuinely hope he does. In time. But I will not spend another 12 minutes of my life waiting to find out, because here is what I know now, sitting on the other side of all of it, in a home that feels like mine for the first time in over a decade. Disrespect is not always loud. Sometimes it is the quiet, practiced removal of your name from things you built. Sometimes it is the patient convincing of a woman that she is lucky to be there at all. Sometimes it wears a nice watch and speaks in a calm voice and calls itself a marriage. But here is what disrespect cannot survive, and that is a woman who finally, clearly, sees it for exactly what it is. I was not lucky to be in that life. That life was built in part with what I brought to it, and the moment I remembered that truly remembered it was the moment everything changed. Not for him. For me.